there's a fish. Yeah, right there. Got him. All right, first fish of the day. Awesome. So when I first moved to the inland Northwest, of course, I really wanted to capitalize on walleye fisheries, and I just go out time and time again and get skunked. I was never catching anything. I was just reading as much content as I could, watching as many videos as I could, and I pretty quickly realized, just through trial and error, well, not quickly, it took me a couple of years just going out and constantly getting nothing, that all of that content that's out there about walleye fishing is mostly oriented towards the Great Lakes and Canadian Shield, and there just wasn't a lot of content that was applicable to Pacific Northwest walleye. And the faster that I just sort of gave up on using tactics that they recommend and listening to what Great Lakes walleye anglers had to say, and the more I just started sort of figuring out things myself here in the Northwest, I just realized that our fisheries are just completely different than what they have in those areas. There we go. It's a nice fish. Looks like I got some weeds too, and somebody else's line. I'll take it. All right, so there's first eater male of the day. Take that. Already bleeding out for me because I got him in the tongue. So I have a ton of respect for, the more popular YouTube anglers like Tom Boley and Jay Siemens, but a lot of what those guys have to say really only applies to their fisheries, not to our fisheries. And of course, we have a pretty wide diversity of fisheries. We've got Big River walleye, or we've got Columbia River impoundments, like today where I'm at Banks Lake. Of course, quite literally by accident, I started to discover just how different our fisheries were. I was fishing on the Columbia River and stopped to take a pee, and I'd been fishing in sort of that classic deep water fisheries. I'm gonna put this guy in nice. And what I mean by classic deep water is that I was targeting 25, 30 feet deep. That is sort of the deepest that most Great Lakes and Canadian Shield anglers will go when pursuing walleye. They'll talk about deep walleye as being, fish that are in 30 feet of water, maybe as deep as 40. But I was in almost 80 feet of water, and I just happened to stop to take a leak, and I accidentally hit the bail on one of my spinning reels that I was jigging with, and the jig dropped down unbeknownst to me in this deep water pool. And once I realized this, I stopped and I grabbed my rod and I went to click the bail and I lifted up and I had a walleye on, and I was in over 80 feet of water. So of course I dropped back down and I got another one and another one and another one. And I started to realize that I really needed to let go of this idea that our fish were going to be anything like these Great Lakes and Canadian Shield Lakes fish. And once I did that and I started exploring and trying experimental things like running downriggers for walleye in really deep water, running 4-ounce bottom walkers in 60 to 100 feet of water, once I started doing that, I started catching a lot more fish, and I just let go of all of those Midwestern walleye beliefs and just started creating my own system of targeting these fish here. And it really varies a lot here in the Northwest. I mean, from the lower Columbia up to the mid Columbia and upper Columbia, where I spend most of my time, to these various impoundments, like Lake Pend Oreille in Idaho, Banks Lake here, Potholes. Each of these lakes really offers their own unique set of challenges for walleye. So today I thought I'd talk about that, how I went from being kind of a crappy walleye angler, like to the point that my wife would never even ask me how my fishing day went when I told her I was going out walleye fishing. She'd just give me that look like she knew I was going to come home with nothing. So now I come home consistently with at least a handful of fish every day, if not limits, where limits apply. So I thought I'd talk about that today, how I went from sucking as a walleye angler to how I became a relatively proficient Pacific Northwest walleye angler. Oop, I think I might have got a bite as I picked that up. I did. I did. That's funny. There's one, must have been following it. As soon as I picked it up, he hit. I was going to change it out to the lure that got mangled on the retrieve with that last fish. That's great. So one of the first things that I hope I've already driven home is that our fish go a lot deeper than Great Lakes and Canadian shieldfish. So there, even in the Great Lakes where it's very deep, fish will mostly just suspend and not go much deeper than 40 feet. Alternatively here, 40 feet's pretty shallow for me. Most of the time I'm fishing far deeper than that. I'm usually going 50, 60 to start and might work my way up shallow, depending on the time of the year. Let's see what we got here. That's another nice walleye. Okay, that's a good size fish. They're really digging blue and chartreuse today, which tends to be one of my favorite color combinations here on Banks Lake. And because I'm fishing deeper, the gear, it's interesting, I kind of have to upsize the weight of the gear, but I like to downsize my line so that I get greater sensitivity, less blowback, that kind of thing. I was going to change this lure out, obviously now I'm not going to. And so what I mean by that is, when I'm jigging, I'm going to be running, 3/4 ounce, 1 ounce jigs or spoons, but I'm only going to be running 5 to 10 pound braid. I'm going to keep it really light. It's going to give me that sensitivity. Likewise, when I'm trolling, like I am today, I'm using 12 pound braid or a 10 pound monofilament, an extra fine monofilament, and I'm using 4 ounce bottom walker, so I really got a lot of weight, so I can get down there, keep an acute angle, so it's easier for me to detect the bite, and also I get way less blowback, and conversely, I also get less tangles because my bottom walker is more upright rather than being pulled leaning forward. I find if I pay out too much line, that bottom walker tends to snag up a little bit more than it does if I have relatively straight up down. I'll take that. I love these Banks Lake fish. I think they taste the best out of all the walleye in the Northwest. And I think that's just because all the water in this lake is top fed out of Lake Roosevelt. So it's relatively clean water. It's just coming in straight off the top of Lake Roosevelt and keeps it nice and clean. Oop, there's fish. Oh, I missed him. Not there. Probably destroyed that worm. Oh yeah. He had himself a tasty treat. Stripped my worm off there. Mostly. I think one of the toughest parts about Northwest walleye is that, I'd watch these videos in the Midwest and they're going out and they're just basic, simple sonar, and they're like, oh, there's some walleye on the graph. There's some walleye on the graph. I rarely, if ever, mark walleye on the graph. And I've tried playing around with sensitivity. I've tried using live scope. I've tried using imaging. And, 9 times, maybe more than 9 times out of 10, I'm just fishing in the blind for these walleye. I just don't see them marked very often. On occasion, like today, every once in a while, I'll see a mark just off the bottom, which potentially could be a walleye. It also could be whitefish in Banks Lake or even smallmouth bass. But, it's rare that I'm like, oh, there's a bunch of marks I think are walleye, and then I plow through them with my gear and get bit. It just seems like I'll be marking nothing for like hundreds and hundreds of yards, and then all of a sudden I'll get bit. And I've put cameras down there, especially on the Columbia River system, and these fish are just hard to the bottom. If they are swimming up off the bottom, they're not much more than a few inches. They really do spend most of their time just belly flat on the bottom. they don't suspend as much as these Midwestern fish do, apparently. That's not to say there aren't suspended fish out here. I do troll crankbaits out here, suspended at times, and have success. But for me, the hard part is differentiating. When you have these multi-species lakes, there's a lot of other fish suspending out in our other walleye bodies of water. They'll have trout in them, they'll have bass in them, and catfish and other things that will suspend as well. And it's really problematic. It's not easy like they show it. I can't just go to a classic walleye holding water and be like, well, there's some marks, those are walleye. But I can go to what I've come to understand as classic walleye water in the Columbia River and here in Banks Lake and drop my camera down there, and if I mark fish, then I'll fish that area. But the only way I'm marking fish is visually confirming their presence with an underwater camera system. The biggest challenge for me is that these underwater camera systems, most of them don't have cables longer than 60 feet, at least the ones that are worth a damn and not crazy expensive. And so, you know, I'm kind of limited to confirming presence of walleye unless they're 60 feet or shallower, even though I'm actually frequently targeting walleye up to 100 feet deep. And those ones, the only way I can confirm their presence or absence is simply to fish them. And if I get bit there, then, well, that confirms that they're at least feeding fish there. I try going up a little bit shallower. I've been getting most of my bites around 60 feet deep today. I'm gonna tuck up here in 50, 40 feet of water, just make a couple 100-yard pass. If I don't get any bites, I'm gonna go back out deep. Well, I didn't find any bites up shallow in the 40 to 50 foot range, so I'm gonna start shifting back out closer to the 60 foot range. I like to experiment moving back and forth along these different depth gradients because I've noticed that sometimes fish will segregate by size, and it really depends on the day. Sometimes I find smaller fish shallower, sometimes I find bigger fish shallower, but it seems to be like 60 to 80 feet. I tend to find a lot of sort of like good eater size males. Those are between 12 and 16 inches. That's sort of my favorite eating size. They get to that age class really fast, especially the males. They'll grow up really quick. They don't have a lot of time to accumulate biotoxins. And for some reason, I predominantly find males out there, and so allows me to leave the big females be. I don't like pulling up big females from extreme depths because I don't like to harvest them, and also they will tend to have some barotrauma at those coming up from those depths. So I'm going to go back out to sort of my classic hunting waters at 60 feet, and maybe work my way out to 80. And see if I can't find some more fish. Ooh, fish, yep. Got a fish on the turn. Right as soon as I got out to 60 feet deep. Feels like a nice fish. Now here at Banks Lake, almost all the fish I catch just have yellow perch in them. On occasion they'll have crawfish or other walleye, but surprisingly I've never found juvenile whitefish in these walleye, even though that should be the predominant prey base. Likewise in the Columbia, in the upper Columbia, it tends to be sculpin, and in the lower Columbia tends to be more shad smolts and on occasion salmon smolts. This is a nice fish. Just again, about that size I'd expect to find out here at 60 feet deep. And there you go, sort of the classic eater size I find out here at 60 feet deep. Same thing in the Columbia. These males tend to be 80 to 100 feet deep in the upper Columbia. In the lower Columbia, it's more 40 to 60 feet for me most of the year, although it varies by time of year. All right, there's another eater male going in the bag. I think I made the right decision coming back out to 60 feet. Fish? Yep, there's fish. Got it. Nice. Did I get a double or am I hooked up on myself? I wonder. So the timing of Midwestern walleye fisheries versus ours is similar in that we get that, typically April spawn, although it can be as early as March and as late as May. And right after that spawn period, that's when I do tend to find more fish moving up shallow. But for the most part, year-round I tend to find fish deep. And so I just tend to favor fishing deeper. Now, if you really want to catch big trophy-sized fish, then going shallow absolutely makes sense, especially during spawn time and pre-spawn and post-spawn. That's where I'll tend to find those big females. But if you just want to catch, decent eater-sized fish, 40 feet to 80 feet is sort of my classic starting water. Nice fish there. There we go. I don't know if I got one on there or not. Definitely seemed like I had two bites at the same time. I don't see it bouncing around too much. I'll go ahead and check this one just to be sure. It feels like there's a fish on, so I think I did get a double there. Yeah, got a double. That's cool. Now I gotta figure out how to convert it. Let's see if I can get this fish right around to the net here. And that's a nicer grade of fish. There. There we go. All right. Let's see if we can stop this from becoming an absolute cluster. That's great. It's a really nice grade of fish. There you go. Can't complain with that. Got like a 15, 16 inch fish and maybe a 18, 19 inch fish. Take that. Solid. Went ahead and marked that spot because unlike the advantage that those Midwest anglers have where they can always see their fish on the graph, I don't have that advantage. But I do know from my camera work is that where there is one walleye, there are usually more, and where there are two walleye, there are definitely more. So I'm going to want to go set back up to troll right back through that same spot. And of course, a fish like that is going to make a very fine meal for two people. You did have barotrauma coming up from that depth, and that is the challenge with targeting these deep fish. And they have a very low survival rate, even released with a release clip. I do carry one in the case I do catch a very large female that I want to release. But overall, in these depths, I just tend to find these males. All right, so I'm up to 5 for the day. Been no real strong preference on color. Seems like blue and chartreuse is working and gold is working. But consistently, the depth is 60 feet. So I'm going to go ahead and reset to go back through that same area. Let's see if we can't find some more fish. Limit is 8, and in parts of Washington State there are no limits, but I still observe a personal limit of 8. Basically, I've looped back around. I'm going to try and come back over that same spot. Anytime I get a walleye, I always mark the location, and whether I'm jigging or whether I'm trolling, I will usually go back over that spot at least twice. And if I don't get anything more, then I'll move on. But all my underwater videography work has pretty much taught me that these fish really are one of those fish species where 10% of the habitat holds 90% of the fish. Fish? Yep, there's fish right there. Right, that same area that I hooked up last time on that double. They're still in there. So I really encourage you, if you're starting out with walleye fishing in the Northwest and you've been going out and struggling, and how much are you relying on Midwestern intel or advice? And, admittedly, when I first started, there was almost nothing about Northwest walleye fishing available out there, and there's still not a ton of content out there on it. But I have two bits of advice. One is, pick a section of water that you're going to probably spend the most time on and really spend some time on it. That's what it took for me, was just spending a lot of time on the same section of water and picking it apart. But also, if you're going to go with a guide to try and learn it, go with a guide who exclusively does walleye. There's a lot of salmon guides out there doing the walleye thing, but they're just doing it as a stopgap measure in between their relatively short and diminishing seasons. And some of those guys don't really know what they're doing. So I really recommend going with somebody who really specializes in walleye, who understands the full life cycle of these fish and their behavior across the whole year in the Pacific Northwest and in that specific section of water that you're going to be fishing. And I think you'll learn a lot more from those guys than you will from those who are just doing it for a few months out of the year as a stopgap measure. This feels like a decent fish. Let's see what we get here. I know for me that, I just kind of stumbled on what worked for me. And then once I realized that I just needed to do my own thing and figure my own thing out, I started experimenting and having a lot more success. This is a really nice fish too. About the same size as that last one. Maybe a touch bigger. Here we go. Take that. Gorgeous, gorgeous fish. There we go. It's another nice 18, 19-inch fish. Good size to it too. Healthy looking. All right, guys. That's probably going to do it for me today on this video. I'm going to try and use the last few hours here before I head back to get 2 more fish to put in the bag. But what I really want you to take away from this is just to free your mind from the whole Midwestern walleye mentality and really expand your horizons when it comes to walleye fishing. Think about the body of water that you're going to be fishing, and really focus on that, and think about going deeper and use some of the technologies that we employ here widely, like downriggers and such, and target some of those deeper fish too if you're fishing in areas that are conducive to that. All right, I'll see you next time, and just remember, fish smarter, not harder. Bye, guys.